Well, lightning rod of lightning rod, we're talking about Ichiro, of course, and it was Jon Morosi of Fox Sports, I believe, talked with Jack Zarenzik over the weekend, and we wound up talking to him on the show, and you listen to the podcast, and I suggest that you do, because he got specific where he didn't quite get specific in his article, and I don't know if this is necessarily news for Mariner fans, maybe it's news coming from Jack Zarenzik, but it's about Ichiro, and they expect him to be back next year.
Yeah, I think it was more confirming what we all anticipated and what some feared, is that they expect him back. Now that doesn't mean he won't retire at the end of the season, but in Morosi's piece he kind of talked around it. He was very general, and then he got very specific in his response to the question of what did Jack Z actually say he was going to come back. He said yes, that's his expectation. So now you get to the point where there seems to be a large segment of the fan base that's had it with Ichiro. There's a lot of anger directed at him.
Really a surprising amount of anger, actually.
Which I don't really get. He's aging. He's a player that's not nearly as productive as he used to be. It happens to all natural players. It's what happens. I don't get the anger. He signed a team-friendly deal with his extension
5 years ago. Yep.
He's not what he was. You're going to see it with Albert Pujols. You'll see it with Alex Rodriguez. You'll see it with any aging player. So,
hey, you said it too, though, during the show. I mean, hasn't gotten in trouble.
No,
doesn't pop off. Hasn't represented the franchise in a negative way. I mean, there have been no negatives off the field.
No, it's just perception. It's rumor. Former teammates say this about him, that about him. But he's never really had an incident you can attach yourself to and say, I don't want this guy on my team, other than he's just not as productive. So it came to the point that we were talking about today. What's the most palatable way? If in fact what Jack Z said is true, that they expect him back, none of us want him back as an everyday player because he's just not that guy anymore. But is there a way he can be a part of this team that would kind of put everybody at peace, where he's a platoon player?
I gotta say no. I mean, if the point of coming back has anything to do with what we've heard about records, about 3,000 hits, I mean, if he's going to come back then as a part-time player, it's going to take him 8 years to get 3,000 hits. You mentioned he's
then that can't be the goal.
Well, it can't be, right? I mean, from his standpoint, I can't imagine that he would do that. What would the point be of doing that if that's part of what the incentive is going to be for all this?
He's just under 500 hits away.
That's which is, so he'll get to. I mean, we'll assume he'll get 50 more hits this year. It's a safe assumption.
Yeah, so he's a little under 100 hits right now, I think.
So he'll be 450 away or something like that. That's old production-wise, 2.5 seasons, and he's not the old producer he used to be. That's 4 years of starting. Not going to happen. So he's never struck me as a guy who's a part-time player who can facilitate in that circumstance. I don't know why he would want to do it. I just can't see that working. I just can't. So if he comes back, I think they would bring him back, and his intention would be that he plays. And if he does, they can't win. He's the worst, in terms of production, just about the worst right fielder in baseball right now. You can't win with that hole in your lineup. Well, if you're going to pay him big, especially.
Yeah, well, two things. You can't bring him back as a full-time player. You can't pay him big. Those two things don't work. So he either accepts that 3,000 is not realistic, and you just accept the part-time role because he just still wants to play, or you cut ties. I mean, it's got to be one or the other, because the first two that you threw out there just aren't. He's not going to get 3,000 hits. He's not going to be an everyday player. If that's their intention coming into next year, fans aren't going to be happy, and I'm going to say that they're completely justified.
I am too. I mean, the X factor is, of course, he knows the owner, and that always is a big X factor, but Ichiro has always been shrouded in mystery, and it's really true these days.